Have you ever wondered why the French defense is such a popular weapon against 1e4? Well, the thing is that it may seem as black is playing passively, allowing white to build the center and sometimes even get passive pieces. But all those are appearances, deceiving appearances, because actually the French defense is a powerful counterattacking weapon. Black provokes white to advance in the center to get a space, so they have a target. They are gonna target white's center and they are gonna bombard it until it gets destroyed. In today's video, I'm gonna cover these ideas and some others on a 10-minute guide to the French defense. So let's get started right now. e4, e6, this is the French defense, d4, d5. And here the most principal, the most interesting probably is e5. Also knight c3 is a main line, very important main line. They put pressure on d5 and at the same time defend e4. So besides knight d2, another way to defend e4, the so-called terrace variation, and the exchange variation for those who are not willing to accept any sort of challenge. They bring symmetry to the board and they play with less risk. So let's start to see what happens when they get a space. So c5, immediately bombarding white center, c3, knight c6, increasing the pressure on d4, knight f3, and now we have several ways to increase the pressure. The idea is to place a knight on f5 and a queen on b6 to exert the maximum pressure. So we can start to build this one in several ways, but queen b6 is the most natural, as d4 is attacked and b2 is also attacked. So white has to be really careful here. And well, let's see what happens with the tricky bishop d3. They are apparently leaving d4 undefended, c takes d4, c takes d4. And here we have to play bishop d7, as capturing the pawn is losing right away. Knight takes d4, knight takes d4, queen takes d4, bishop b5, check, and our queen falls right away. So by playing bishop d7, we block the diagonal. Now this bishop has no access to our king, and we are threatening knight takes d4. So now white has to decide whether they sacrifice a pawn by castling. That is pretty popular, we would accept it, reaching a very interesting theoretical line that is beyond this 10-minute guide. On the other hand, they may try to defend the pawn by playing bishop c2. Now d4 is defended, but after knight b4, trying to get the bishop pair and improve the bishop, we're gonna get a fantastic position. Now, of course, bishop b3 is a horrible move, queen a6, or even bishop b5, and we will be controlling this diagonal. Our not so active bishop now became a monster, and that would be typical of the French advance. Not long ago, I delivered all the videos and the material of my Chessable course on the French defense, so it will be published very soon. It will be released very soon. I'll keep you informed in the case you want to go deeper into this fascinating defense. Okay, let's go back to the queen b6, and white may play something more passive with bishop e2, and after knight h6 or c takes d4, this one is more precise, knight h6. Now we are heading to f5 to put pressure, and they cannot capture because of queen takes b2. We attack the rook, and later on we're gonna grab the bishop. Knight bd2, g takes h6. We are a pawn up, and you may argue that our king side is a little bit weakened, but mainly we're gonna play bishop g7, castle, and later f6 to demolish those pawns. And you will see our dark square bishop putting a lot of pressure on those pawns. So, and besides, our queen is in no danger. We can always drop back queen a3, queen a7, something like queen b6, queen c7, and we're a pawn up. So that would be a typical example of how the pressure converts into something bigger. So bishop e2, c takes d4, c takes d4, knight h6, better than knight e7 because knight e7, knight a3, knight f5, and knight c2. Yeah, as the diagonal gets blocked, this diagonal gets blocked, they are able to play knight a3. Okay, so after knight h6, if they castle, when we simply play knight f5 and we capture the pawn on d4, bishop e3 is not enough to solve the problem, as we can capture on b2 again. This is more or less the spirit of the advanced variation. If you're finding these ideas interesting and the ideas that I generally share in the channel, please, I'm gonna ask you to subscribe. That's the best way you can support the channel. Thank you very much. What happens with knight c3? Knight c3, it's a huge line. I mean, theoretically speaking, this one is considered the most dangerous, and we can play knight f6, the so-called classical line, or bishop b4, the win-hour variation. Yeah, pretty interesting, but also pretty demanding. To play bishop b4, you need to know a lot. The game may continue with e5, and we play c5, putting immediate pressure on d4. So this is really interesting. On the other hand, knight c3, knight f6, now we're threatening d takes e4, and if they advance, knight f d7, and they are up to a very interesting challenge, how to defend their central pawns against our idea of playing c5 and getting rid of those pawns. So the answer is the so-called Stein's variation, f4, c5, knight f3, knight c6, and they have defended d4 effectively with the bishop, the knight, and the queen, and at the same time the pawn on f4 is defending e5. So yeah, this is a very popular setup. Here I could argue that c takes d4, knight takes d4, bishop c5 is the simplest variation, castle, castle, and a6, intending to capture on d4 and to launch our a and b pawns against white's king. Yeah, this is a pretty interesting line that is considered slightly better for white. But besides, here against bishop a3, black has several lines, a6, rook b8, bishop e7, so there are several alternatives to the most simple variation. So let's continue with the so-called Tarrasch variation. Yeah, the Tarrasch is designed to counter bishop b4 with c3. This is the easy one. So but the problem with the Tarrasch variation is that d5 is not attacked, so black can play c5. E takes d5, and here both capturing with the queen, intending to get this kind of position where the central pawns are an asset, an important asset, or even capturing with a pawn, trying to get to the isolated queen's position, that are really interesting, that are deceiving, that may seem inferior for black, but black's free piece play will compensate for the IQP as usual. Of course, an interesting alternative is always knight f6, e5, and knight fd7, intending to attack white's central pawns with the usual means. Yeah. So, but this is something completely different than c5. c5 might be the most principal. And well, the exchange variation, the shy one, trying to get a calmer position with something like bishop d3. Then we have a way to spice up things by playing knight c6, c3, bishop d6, knight f3, bishop g4, castle, and knight g7. This is a way to prepare queen d7 and castle. Yeah, just watch out not to castle on the king side, because this one would be hanging. Bishop takes, and knight g5 check, followed by queen takes g4. So also an alternative is playing knight g7, castle, and bishop f5, trading this active bishop and trying to make this one better than white's dark square bishop. Always also thinking about queen d7 and long castle, with intention of launching all our king side pawns against white's king. So those are the main lines against the French. There are some Sidelines, yeah, d3, b3, knight f3. Yeah, knight f3 looks normal, but after d5, they are not able to defend it properly, so they sometimes have to advance it, and c5. And this is a different advanced variation. Now, if they play d4, we may play c takes d4. The wing gambit is an interesting idea here. We accept the gambit and get an interesting game. Yeah, we need to know a little bit of theory, but usually black is doing pretty well. So I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope if you haven't thought about the French as a viable defense against 1e4, you now are considering it, as it is really promising and more or less easy to play. So see you next time. Thank you very much for your attention. Goodbye.